Hey everybody, in the January 2023 update patch notes, under the balance changes, it did say that there would be an article that would go into more detail about those balance changes, and here it is, the Ministry of Balance Reports, which is big, small changes, and this concerns primarily French destroyers and Italian tech tree cruisers, and for the French destroyers, they are moving away from a torpedo-centric approach to be more of a gunboat-centric approach. I think there'll be some information in here about the Italian cruiser semi-armor piercing shells, as well as some basic changes to the way HE shell damage is calculated. So let's check the French destroyers. And yeah, so in the past, the ships have been primarily torpedo-centric, and now they're being changed to gunboats. So let's start with the Tier 3 French destroyer Barosque, and here, as far as the main battery armament goes, main battery reload speed has been buffed. HE shell damage and armor-piercing shell damage has been buffed. As far as the torpedoes, the reload speed of both the stock and upgraded torpedoes has been nerfed by several seconds here, and the speed of the torpedoes once they're in the water has been increased and buffed by 1 knot. Then we have the Tier 4 Jaguar. That's a great ship. And the main battery armament, HE shell damage and armor-piercing shell damage have both been improved. As far as the torpedoes go, the stock and upgraded torpedo reload has been nerfed, but the speed of both have been buffed, similar to what you saw in the Tech 3 Barosque there. And both the stock and upgraded torpedoes, the detectability range has been nerfed, as is the damage output, and all the torpedoes of the Jaguar are less likely to disable modules. So the Tier 5 Guepard, pretty much the same thing on the main battery armament. HE and armor-piercing shell damage has been increased, and here the armor-piercing shell service cost increased from 0 to 12 credits per shell. Oh, I certainly didn't know that each shell had a certain cost. So yeah, when you're firing away with your main guns, you might be draining your bank account if you fire off too many of those shells. That's kind of interesting. Okay, moving on. Main battery reload booster has been changed. Now has 2 booster charges instead of 1. And the cooldown time of those reload boosters is now 2 minutes instead of 2.5 minutes. So, all right, torpedo armament. This has been nerfed except for the speed. So the speed has been increased up to 66 knots, which is kind of substantial. But the reload speed of the torpedoes, torpedo detectability range, torpedo damage, and torpedoes are less likely to disable modules. So all those items have been nerfed except for the speed of the torpedoes once they're in the water has been increased. That is for the stock torpedoes. And for the upgraded torpedoes, speed has been increased once they're in the water, but their detectability range has been nerfed, as is the damage output, and they're less likely to disable modules. So pretty much the same there. They didn't do anything with the reload of the upgraded torpedoes, though. So next up is a Tier 6 Vanguard, and here the main battery armament, the HE and armor-piercing shell damage has been buffed. Main battery reload booster now has 2 of those boosters, and the cooldown time is now 2 minutes, as before. And I think this is going to be common whenever you see the reload booster change there. And then the torpedo armament for the Vanguard is pretty much the same for stock and upgraded torpedoes. Specifically, the speed has been increased of the torpedoes once they're in the water, but their reload speed has been nerfed, as is their detectability range, their damage, and both torpedoes, stock and upgraded torpedoes, are now less likely to disable modules. As far as the Tier 7 Le Fantastique, HE shells and armor-piercing shells are both, the damage has been increased, and same deal with the main battery reload booster. Now has 2 charges, but now the main battery reload booster duration is now up from 15 to 20 seconds. Doesn't say anything about the cooldown time though, so I'm not sure what the cooldown time was. Maybe it was left the same. And then here for the torpedo armament, the stock torpedoes, their detectability range has been buffed by 0.1 kilometers. I don't think that's really helping much, but it's making a little bit of a difference there. The reload speed of the stock torpedoes has been nerfed, as is the torpedo damage has been nerfed. Upgraded torpedoes, the speed is increased. For the upgraded torpedoes, they are now 72 knots, and the detectability range has been buffed by 0.1 kilometers again, just like the stock torpedoes. But the upgraded torpedoes have a nerf on their reload speed, the damage output, and the torpedo range has been nerfed down to 8 kilometers from 8.3. The Tier 8 Mogador main battery armament, it's just got changes to the reload booster. It now has 2 reload boosters with a duration of 20 seconds. Torpedo armament for both torpedoes, the only changes there is the damage output has been nerfed. And the Kleber, same thing with the Kleber. Main battery armament has the only changes is the reload booster. Now there's 2 of them and the duration is 20 seconds. But the torpedo armament has a nerf as far as the reload speed, and damage has been decreased for the torpedo armament on the Kleber. And that is it for the changes to the French destroyers. Now we're on to the Italian attack tree cruisers. And now you're going to have a choice to equip the cruisers with semi-armor piercing shells in place of HE shells. You can make the choice of either or. And a few of these ships have also received improvements to their standard armor piercing shells. And in regard to the increase in reload time of semi-armor piercing shells, the majority of Italian cruisers have been performing well, with the exception of the lower tier ships. The results of testing show that giving semi-armor piercing shells to a ship markedly increases her performance, so we aim to make this addition without overcooking the ships. If needed, changes can always be made in the future. So when you add semi-armor piercing modules to any of these ships, it does increase the reload time of the main guns, whether it's armor piercing or semi-armor piercing. I don't think it's a different reload time depending on the shell type. So Tier 2 Toronto increases the reload time up to 13 seconds. Maximum damage 3550, penetrates 42 millimeter of armor, and 70 degree ricochet angle, guaranteed to ricochet at 80 degrees, can ricochet at 70. Tier 3 Gusano, reload time goes up to 16.5 seconds, maximum damage of 3850 for the semi-armor piercing shells, penetrates 42 millimeter of armor, can ricochet at 70 degrees, will guarantee to ricochet at 80 degrees. Tier 4 Monticello, reload time is increased to 15.5 seconds. Maximum shell damage for the semi-armor piercing 3850. Penetrates 42 millimeter of armor. Same 70 degree and 80 degree ricochet angles. Tier 5 Trento, when you add the semi-armor piercing module, reload time goes up to 16.5 seconds. Maximum semi-armor piercing shell damage is 4850. Penetrates 55 millimeter of armor, and the same 70 degree ricochet, can ricochet at 70, guaranteed at 80. Tier 6 Zara, that goes up to 16 seconds with the semi-armor piercing module enabled. Semi-armor piercing shell damage is 5050, penetrates 55 millimeter of armor, can ricochet at 70, guaranteed to ricochet at 80. Tier 7 Amalfi, that goes up to 17.5 seconds once you add the semi-armor piercing module. Semi-armor piercing shell damage is 5200, penetrates 55 millimeter of armor, and can ricochet at 70, guaranteed at 80. And then we have a little something here about the HE penetration logic. And this is a functional change to how all high explosive HE shell munitions work in the game. Main battery guns or secondary ATBA guns and carrier bombs. Before this change, as in currently before this update, high explosive shells of all types had to have a greater penetration than the armor the shell or bomb struck. So if a high explosive shell had 25 millimeter of penetration, it could only penetrate up to 24 millimeter of armor. This was called the greater than or -1 rule. After this change, high explosive of all types will now penetrate armor that is thinner or equal to their penetration value. So if a high explosive shell has 25 millimeter of penetration, it can penetrate up to 25 millimeter of armor. We call this the equal to rule. In effect, this improves the effectiveness of high explosive shells and secondary battery guns in the game. The most improved ships will be light cruisers armed with 6-inch 152 millimeter guns and at tiers 5 and 6. We're aware of a few additional changes that may need to be made and will be watching impacted ships closely, in particular the battleships at these tiers. Okay, and then the last one here is Miscellaneous, Tier 7 Vanguard. Finally, let's start the new year with a time-honored tradition. A Vanguard buff. Yippee! This change makes the ship more consistent with the rest of the British battleship tech tree while marginally improving her overall performance. Yeah, that's what the ship needs. That's great. Main battery high explosive shell penetration is increased from 64 to 95 millimeter. That is a big whopping change. I wonder if that's a typo. Probably not. Okay, try out the changes and turn the tide. All right, well, that is it for the Ministry of Balance reports, big and small changes. Go ahead and let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is the Jaguar, and I'll see you on the high seas. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you like it.